Hey everyone, it is Banlist season, and today I'm going to be talking about Magic the Gathering's ban list, its unbans, its philosophy in terms of these unbans, why it's moving towards some other games that I play, and ultimately why its philosophy comes up short in a way that's really sad. So let's get into it. First of all, in the Pioneer format, Giganta the Wellspring was banned. This card is a companion, and for those of you who play Yu-Gi-Oh! Like myself, we're all too familiar with this mechanic. It is a card that you can access from outside the game that can enter into the game and be played. So in Yu-Gi-Oh! We call it the extra deck. We get 15 of these, but in Magic, they made a small subset of them. You could only use one at a time, and you had a deck building restriction required to be able to use it at all. So in this case, Giganta the Wellspring's deck building restriction is that no card in your starting deck has more than one of the same mana symbol in its mana cost. So for example, this card here, Faithless Looting, has 1 red, you could play it in your Giganta deck. This card here, Splinter Twin, has 2 reds, so you could not play it in your Giganta deck. You could not reveal and use Giganta for the game if Splinter Twin was in your deck. This comes with a whole host of things. A lot of people think that Companion is probably the worst mechanic they've ever made in terms of tournament Magic. Usually, this mechanic is either good enough to restrict players from playing certain cards because they want to have access to this Companion, or it is so restrictive that nobody plays it. But what we do know is that an extra deck is amazing. It's so good in every game, and if you can access cards from outside the game, it's generally better than not being able to do that, and it'll give you an important leg up on your opponents. This card got banned in the Pioneer format. It was also banned in the Modern format, which is where the majority of our bans come today. In the Legacy format, there were a couple of bans as well, Psychic Frog being probably the most important of all of them. There was another card, Vexing Bauble, that got banned. I'll talk about that in a second. Psychic Frog is a 1/2 for 2 with 3 abilities. So anyone who plays any card game knows that a creature or a monster, whatever you want to call it, with 3 abilities, generally very good. Usually in today's new age of card games, you want 2 abilities to be playable. 3 abilities can push you over the edge, and this guy's was amazing. He can draw a card every time he deals damage to a player through combat. He can discard a card to grow himself, put a counter on himself that makes his stats go up. And then he can remove 3 cards from your graveyard from the game to gain flying, which makes him harder to block. Therefore, it's easier for him to get damage in and then draw cards off of his own ability. And the reason he got banned was because Legacy is a format where you have all the cards in the game, and that includes, very importantly, these things called counter spells that stop your opponent from casting cards. And the counter spells in Legacy, the most important ones, cost 0 mana. So often you are trading resources at very low mana and stopping what they're doing for free. So if this gets into play, they attempt to remove it with a kill spell, you counter for free, and then you get an attack for some damage and draw a card, which is often enough to win the game when you're drawing counter spells that are free. If you are not drawing counter spells that are free, this card is also just a way to, as you can see, discard a card, put a counter on it to grow and just win the game on its own despite drawing cards. In Legacy, there are cards that let you discard your hand and draw an absurd amount of cards, which discarding your hand is not a downfall if you can use Psychic Frog. You just discard your rolling in Psychic Frog, use the card that lets you draw a new hand, discard them all in Psychic Frog, and get in for like 15. It's possible, it's doable. It wasn't really what people were doing with it, but it is another way to use this card that is really OP, generally deserved to be banned. The other card that was banned was Vexing Bauble. We talked a lot about free counter spells, and Vexing Bauble countered every card if you didn't spend mana on that card. So it was really restricting a part of the format that was necessary in free counter spells to keep all these broken things from killing you. In Legacy, there's a lot of combo decks that can win on the first or second turn that get stopped by free counter spells. So it's an important back and forth, but basically this card broke that important back and forth by being protected by free counter spells, winning the game with a hit, and therefore it got banned in Legacy. So did Vexing Bauble that countered the free counter spells. Honestly, probably good pitch for the game. I don't play much Legacy, but I assume that this will make the format a little more healthy overall. Finally, the most important and most fun bans of today, and unbans even, are in the modern format. So modern is a format where you can play with the last 18-ish years of cards. Giganta the Wellspring was banned for the same reason that we talked about in Pioneer. It was a free card from outside the game that restricted your deck building, so it got banned for the same reasons. The One Ring, the most popular card out of the Lord of the Rings set, was banned. The One Ring is a 4-mana indestructible artifact that when it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you gain protection from everything until your next turn, which in Magic means you get a host of protective abilities that usually protect you from most things. There are ways to still kill through it, but they're very few and far between and often aren't played in a competitive setting. It'd be challenge mode to try and kill your opponent through this card, basically. And then, you also, at the beginning of your upkeep, lose a life for each burden counter that's on this. And every time you can tap this card to put a burden counter on it and then draw that many cards. So for all of you card game players who may not play Magic, this is a 4-mana indestructible artifact that protects you until your next turn, guaranteeing you another turn, and then also draws you three cards over the course of that turn that you freely gave yourself. The downside being that once you draw 3 cards or something, you're taking some amount of damage every turn, but the way that this text legendary artifact reads is that if you get another copy of the One Ring into play, you can sacrifice your first one. So often you're drawing into another copy of the One Ring, playing the One Ring, sacrificing your first one, and then resetting your ring and getting to draw more. It was really broken. It was colorless, so it broke the color wheel, kind of the balance of Magic, where you only have access to a certain amount of colors in your deck. The more colors you play, the harder it is to cast your spells, but because this is generic, it can go in any deck. It was played in about 60% of decks in Modern, and that was too good. It was overbearing for the format, and the One Ring was banned. Do I think it's fair? Probably. This is one of the most broken cards you've ever heard of. Not only is it broken if you are playing a constructed format where there's 4 copies of each card in your deck, so you can naturally reset it. There's also lots of ways in the game to just remove it from the game and put it back into the game, or put it in your graveyard and return it back from your graveyard. So even when you didn't have a second copy of the ring, there were ways to reset it. It was playable in every deck. It gave every deck the best draw engine in the game, which is really broken, so it got banned. The last card banned, I don't have the card, I think I traded mine on pre-release day, is Amped Raptor. And the reason I show these cards, as Yu-Gi-Oh players, we are very accustomed to these things called packages, where you put 5 to 10 cards of a certain subset into your deck. And so Amped Raptor was a card from the Energy package. Energy is a specific and rare resource in Magic the Gathering that is temporary in that cards give you energy. So for example, this card here gives you 3 energy, and then they let you pay an amount of energy that doesn't come back unless you use another card that says you get energy. So it's not like mana where you untap it every turn and you have access to it every turn. It is just its own resource created by cards. And what Amped Raptor did was it was a 2-mana 2/1 with First Strike, I believe, that gave you 2 energy when it came into play, and then you would reveal cards from the top of your deck until you hit a spell. And if that spell cost less mana than the energy that you have, you could cast it by paying energy instead of mana. And this was very broken for a variety of reasons. Generally, because this package was just too pushed. They gave us too many good cards, giving us too many good energy. And something had to go. The package was really good. It was the best deck in the game in Modern. And Amped Raptor, they believed, would be the best one to hit. It was also the one where you could play it in any deck that only ran 2 mana or less things. So you could play it, get 2 energy, and then flip until you hit a spell. And if you built your deck the right way, it would guarantee that you always hit a spell that you could cast off of it, indiscriminate of how much energy you actually have. So it was played in a different way than it was designed to be played. And it was just really good, and they banned it. Personally, it's not what I would have banned out of the energy deck. I think Ajani, while The 2-mana Johnny Flip Planeswalker is really just a broken card. It creates a lot of dumb game states where you can't kill your opponent's things because they'll flip a Johnny. Either way, Amped Raptor, part of an over-pushed package that dominated the game, and so it took a ban. It is what it is. The most exciting parts of the modern hits are the unbans, however. So let's talk about those. In Modern, there were 4 cards unbanned. And this is very interesting because this is a strategy that rarely Magic takes, which is unbanning important cards in their formats. So let's talk about them a little bit. First of all, Faithless Looting. This is a 1-mana sorcery that draws 2 cards and discards 2 cards. And then once it's in the graveyard, you can pay 3, 2 in a red, to recast it from the graveyard. This was very good and constructed because even just with its 4 copies of itself, you would draw 2 and discard 2, often discarding more copies of itself, which then you could cast from the graveyard. It enabled lots of graveyard strategies, many different graveyard strategies, and in my opinion, it was what made Modern very fun for so many years. It made Modern feel like a different format than the others, less samey. It was a card that was very good in Modern, but not necessarily very good in Legacy. There's often a lot of better enablers that you could use instead of this in Legacy, with more cards available. With less cards available, there were less synergy pieces, value cards to discard, just a smaller card pool to kind of enable this card to be as good as it was in Modern. And it's a card that pops up in newer formats, but not as often and as strong as it was in Modern, and have it back is so exciting. It enables a lot of decks that have a lot of interactive elements with the graveyard. Caring about a new zone is important, more than just the board and the hand. It's also just a common, so there's a lot of ways, it's not like some of the other cards on this list that are very expensive to buy. You can pick up a Faithless Looting style deck for a reasonable cost and play it. Speaking of reasonable cost, Mox Opal, reasonably costed mana-wise at 0 mana. It's a 0 mana legendary artifact that you can just slap on the board, and it makes 1 mana of any color if you already have 3 artifacts, including itself. It's a Mox. Generally, that is a very good thing to be in Magic. Generally, there's 0 mana artifacts that tap for mana, kind of foregoing lands in the process, or letting you play a lot less lands. This one requires you to have lots of artifacts in your deck, which is not a huge cost, and it enabled a lot of artifact strategies. It was banned because some of those strategies were very, very played. This was played across a lot of decks, so it had high representation, and overall it was just a great card that never went away in Modern, and they eventually banned it. Since it was banned, most of the artifact decks have not come back to popularity. Every so often they'll print an artifact card that is very strong, and for one weekend all the tournament decks play it, and then the next weekend all of the other tournament decks put artifact hate in their sideboards, and no one really plays artifact decks over a long period of time due to that. There's really a lot of ways to counteract them. So they brought this back thinking that, especially with a lot of the new ways that they've printed to counteract them, that this card will be okay. This card is very strong. I'm not convinced that it'll stick around. I think it might get rebanned again, but overall I'm excited that it's back. It's fun. It is the only problem is that it's like, $150 right now or something. And I think they'll print it again. I think this card hopefully will be able to be played in Modern for a long time, because it was one of the staples that never went away, that allowed you to play similar decks throughout the entire history of the game, which is great for the Modern format. It was why Modern was created. Green Sun Zenith is a green and X sorcery, which means that you have to pay at least 1 green, and then you can pay as much mana as you want to search your library for a specifically green creature with the mana cost that you paid for X and put it into play. And then you shuffle this back into your deck. It was a weird cycle of cards where really only this one was played in long-term formats and kind of stood the test of time. So this card was printed because, this card was played because it is a very flexible card. You can get any card in your deck, assuming you have 1 plus the amount of mana. And then not only could you do that, this would go back into your deck and you could draw it again over and over and over again. It used to enable low to the ground combo decks where you would pay this and like 3 more to get out one of your combo pieces and then use it to combo off. In the modern age, like those combo pieces that we used to get are already heavy in mana cost. The one I think of is Kitchen Finks. It's a 3 mana creature that you can use some other cards to combo with infinitely. 3 mana in 2024 is a lot more expensive than it was in 2012 or when this card was popular. Not only that, but then having to pay the other extra mana on top of it makes me think that really this card is not meant for the classic, 3-card green creature combo deck that really isn't popular at all in Magic these days. But what it is an extra copy of Dryad Arbor, which is a land that's also a creature. So you would pay 1 and then not pay an additional cost and get a land out of your deck that's also a 1/1 creature, which is what made this card what it was, made it stand the test of time, and eventually got it banned. It's also used to search one of the more important creatures in the game, which is Primeval Titan. Primeval Titan is a 6 mana 6/6 that when it comes into play, gets you 2 lands from your deck and lets you combo off using lands. So I think this card is really strong. I could see this card getting banned again, but overall it's exciting. It is played in a lot of different formats and it's a strong card. So hopefully not too strong, because I like this strategy of unbanning stuff. And if they are ever going to have to ban a card again, hopefully it's not one of these so that we can continue to ban things. Splinter Twin is a 4 mana enchantment that enchants a creature. So you slap it onto a creature, and then that creature gains the ability to tap itself and create a token copy of itself that enters the battlefield. Now, this goes infinite when the original creature that you copied untaps a creature. So the token copy will enter, untap the original creature, which then you tap again to make a token copy. The token copies all have haste, so it can come into play, it'll untap, it'll tap again, and make infinite token copies that all have haste and can attack on the first turn, and you attack your opponent for infinite. This was the strongest deck back in the boomer ages of Magic, because you could play a back and forth interactive game and then finish it with this combo out of nowhere. You would have to play the creature that it combos with, and the creatures that it combos with often have flash, so you can cast them at the end of your opponent's turn, untap all your mana, going to your turn, cast this, and then combo them. So you would, out of nowhere, have nothing in play, and then the next turn they would be comboed to death. This deck is probably still good. It is still a turn 4 win that lets you play an interactive game in the process. Is it as good as what we had been seeing for the last couple of years, especially including things like the One Ring? Probably not. In a format where this is banned, who knows? But I'm very excited. It's these type of cards that make an old player who has not played the game in a long time, like myself, get really excited for the game and want to come back to playing it. And it's really interesting because these cards that they unbanned point to a philosophy that is pretty liberal in its design. So when we see unbans in other games, I play Yu-Gi-Oh! Feel free to sound off in the comments about what other games you play. But we see cards like Sky Striker Mobilize Engage or Spellbook of Judgment get unbanned. And, despite this card winning one big tournament in the hands of one of the best players to ever touch this game, often the cards that we unban in Yu-Gi-Oh! Are not format defining. And that's really unfortunate because who cares? It's like we're doing a kind of meticulous process that just dilutes the fun of a ban list. But in Magic's classic gung-ho strategy of do whatever the heck sounds fun and figure out the rest later, they have unbanned 4 of these, what I think will be pillars of the format, which is interesting. And it's different than Yu-Gi-Oh's philosophy. Finally, I just want to talk a little bit about why Magic is moving a little bit toward Yu-Gi-Oh's philosophy when it comes to ban lists, and kind of the differences why Magic's hopefully won't come up short in comparison to Yu-Gi-Oh's in ways that we just discussed. So Magic has begun to ban on a predicted timetable, which is useful for the company because they know exactly when they need to post ban lists for the players. Yu-Gi-Oh has been doing this for a few years now. It is less exact. Yu-Gi-Oh players know a general time when we'll get the next ban list, but it's not exactly a specific day in the same way Magic's is. And both games have gone through a little bit of a renaissance in terms of making ban lists feel exciting. So clearly we got some things to be excited about in the Magic game. In Yu-Gi-Oh, we recently had it for the first time, the ban list announced on stream at one of their biggest tournaments, and that was something that rejuvenated a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh players' excitement in the game, excitement in the ban list, all these things, because it was live streamed, presented by a person, as they've been doing in Japan for a long time. So these scheduled ban lists, I think, is something that is just going to be a part of a lot of popular card games moving forward. And I'm surprised that Magic went with such a liberal unban decision on their first go around without looking at what Yu-Gi-Oh is doing to try and mitigate this scheduled ban list, mitigate the scheduled ban list drawbacks, I should say. So what a lot of YouTubers have been saying about scheduled ban lists has been that scheduled ban lists make sure that you have a format for a specific amount of time. And that is true. You do know for a fact that, for example, we are not going to get Birthing Pod unbanned in the next 2 weeks. We know that Guide of Soul will not be banned next week because Energy is still too good. The ban wasn't enough and these cards are still too good. However, what we do know is that because of these scheduled ban lists, they are feeling the pressure to do exciting things like unban 4 pillars of the format. They're feeling the pressure that if they don't ban the One Ring, one of their most profitable and exciting cards of the last decade, that people will not play the game as much as they have been for the last few years. And what's interesting about that for Magic is that there are so many formats that allow for these exciting unbans to happen with the same kind of outlet, being that even if these ruin the game, you can turn to another format and continue to play the game in a way that you enjoy without needing to interact with any of these unbanned cards. In Yu-Gi-Oh, if we unban something, for example, on the most recent ban list, Zodiac Barrage was unbanned. It's a spell card for a specific archetype that we don't think will be good. It was the best archetype in the game when it was played, but no longer has that aura. If Zodiac Barrage is too good, it won't be, but if it is, we won't be able to do anything about it until the next ban list. Same way with Mox Opal, Splinter Twin, Green Suns. This is kind of just a design philosophy of the metagame that these these games have begun to use when creating their ban list. Is that a good thing? Maybe. Depends on how excited you are to play Modern. Depends on how excited you are to turn away from Modern and play a different format. It's really dependent on your commitment to the game, but what we do know is that unbanning cards like this is way more exciting than what Yu-Gi-Oh has been producing for the last 4 ban lists, which are cards that nobody cares about anymore, cards that have been in the process of getting unbanned for over a year, that nobody plays, nobody cares if it goes from 0 copy to 1 copy to 2 copy to 3 copies. The splashy ban lists are what makes ban list reacting fun, what makes waking up and talking with your friends about what cards got banned, what cards got unbanned fun. If anything, the biggest problem so far that I've seen with Magic is that for a returning player like myself, I don't know how I'm supposed to interact with these cards. These are all cards I own except for this one. This one's a proxy, but these other ones are all cards I own. I could, in theory, I have a set of Splinter Twins and the cards they combo with. I would just need to pick up the lands. I could very easily get a modern deck. But then what, you know? Like, modern locals have how many players go to them? Am I supposed to wait for a big event to then grind side events for my modern deck? And until then, you know, where's the bustling scene that I would need to buy cards at a rate that I would to make a modern deck? So overall, even though I'm way more excited about the Magic the Gathering unbans, I am probably more likely to be playing with the Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Who knows how often I'll get a chance to play Modern. If there's a bustling scene, everyone pretty much knows the only in-person play these days is Commander. So it's hard to interact with things like this unless you play online. And what's the point of even buying these cards if you only are going to play them online? You can't play them in person. Yu-Gi-Oh, while the bans may have been less exciting, the unbans less exciting, whatever you want to call it, at least I can go to a local and continue to play the game at a high level. I'm sure there's probably some modern locals somewhere, but who knows, man? I haven't heard of them. If you know if your modern local is excited, please write in the comments. I'm excited too. All right, have a good one, everyone.